All right. Good morning. I'm glad to be here talking with you about sex, maybe everybody's favorite topic when you think about married life. Certainly one that's important to all of us. Big part of married life, big part of our relationships. I just think it's funny thinking about sex and just the whole topic of it. It's something that we're all so very interested in. It's an important topic to us, and yet in some circumstances, the last thing we would even dream of bringing up and mentioning. And we can get so nervous and so anxious to talk about it and deal with it. At other times, it's just all we can think about and talk about. So hopefully we'll be comfortable to go there and talk about some intimate things this morning. My purpose today in being here with you is not to go through some sort of instruction manual on all the positions and great wild things you can do, although hopefully you'll have fun with that along the way. But my hope is to really share with you a perspective on how the sexual aspect of your marriage relationship can be its very best, can be a wonderful thing to help keep you connected together, to be a source of strength in your marriage, and hopefully to share some things to avoid some problems along the way that commonly come up that can go right to the heart of the marriage relationship itself. So I will make some time at the end for some question and answer time if anyone's bold enough to ask a question about sex with the cameras rolling and all that good stuff, and hopefully we'll have some fun with this. But there's a lot of expectations that go into sex, that go into that part of our marriage, that part of our relationship, and there's a lot of places that those expectations can come from, and I want to take a few minutes and just talk about where some of those expectations may come from. Some of them are obvious to you, some of them you may not have thought about, and just how important it is to pay attention to those, to realize that, and to be able to see for yourself what your own expectations are of your sexual relationship, of yourself, of your mate, and to be able to understand what your spouse's or fiance's expectations are of sex. The family that you grew up in makes a huge impact on what you expect sexually. Now, you may have grown up in a family like I did where no one ever talked about sex. That was a totally taboo topic, and you couldn't even envision your parents doing it, although obviously they did because you're living proof of that, right? Others of you may have grown up in a family where it was fine, you talked about it, it was comfortable, no big deal, it wasn't like it was off limits. But however sex got talked about, there were messages sent about sex, and good or bad, what was its place in marriage, what was its place out of marriage. Your primary source of learning about sex and sexuality is a family that you grew up in, at least for most of your early years. So that makes an impact. And if you haven't talked about that together as a couple, I would encourage you to do that. Just kind of talk about what was that like growing up, Was it comfortable, not comfortable? Did you have any clue how intimate your parents were? If you didn't, you want to take a wild guess at it, and what does that mean to you, and what expectations does that put on you and your spouse for marriage? Certainly a huge area I think that's very important to pay attention to and to talk about before you're married is the previous sexual experiences that each of you have had. Now, I'm not talking about going into all kinds of detail. For some of you, there may be nothing to share there. You're holding out, you're saving yourself for marriage. And that's great. Congratulations. More power to you. I hope you're able to stick out that commitment to yourself, to God, to one another. But for many, there have been previous sexual experiences, and I think it's important to share in the sense that there may have been a relationship that you were in previously where it got into just a lot of sexual baggage for you, that there are things that you feel maybe still ashamed of, or that you feel kind of scared of that happened that were really problematic for you, and they're just going to have some impact on your relationship now. That doesn't mean it has to set the tone for your marriage and for the sexual part of your marriage in the future, but it's going to make an impact, and it's important to talk about that, particularly if you've been through any kind of sexual trauma. If there's any kind of abuse of any kind sexually, I just think it's critical that you share that with one another, that you don't hold that back as a secret, because if you hold it back and don't share with each other, it's going to come out. It's going to make an impact in your sexual relationship eventually, in your marriage. It can cause major problems if you don't go ahead and deal with it. talk through it, whether that's together with a counselor, maybe something you've dealt with in the past, you've pretty well worked through it, but you just kind of need to make sure your spouse is aware of that, fiance is aware of that. So that's important. What are your personal desires and fears about sex, about what you're expecting with one another? What are you really hoping it'll be like? What are you afraid it might be like? What are you hoping won't happen? Those are things that I think are helpful to share before you're married. Although I will say, if you're planning on waiting until you're married to have sex, I recommend that you don't share too much about what you're hoping for and desiring in terms of details. My wife and I, at the time, engaged in all that. We just really enjoyed sharing all kinds of things we thought we'd do, and then we're trying to hold out, and man, that was hard. So I don't recommend that deal. But it's good to share those things up front, and very important over the course of your marriage relationship, to share with each other because it changes. Our desires can change, things that turn us on, things that we enjoy, things that make us nervous, that we feel anxious about. Those things change. And it's important to be able to share those with one another. We'll come back to that concept a little bit more here in a little bit. Some other things that can make an impact on what we expect in our sexual relationship, things that we hear from friends or other people who've got more experience, or certainly that have been married for a while and know what it's like to have sex in marriage, kind of makes an impact on what we expect, good, bad, or otherwise. Cultural messages. This is a huge one. I won't even try to unpack all of this stuff, but our culture just sends constant messages about sexuality, both in marriage, out of marriage. It seems like in general, the message is sex in marriage is like, yeah, whatever, kind of boring, but anything else, if you're just hooking up with people, wow, that's the way to go, that's where all the fun is, and just some really goofy, totally unbiblical messages that are constantly bombarding us from our culture, from lots of ways, but I'll not go into all that today. And then certainly whatever church background that you may have. For some of you, that may be a very big part of your life. For others, maybe didn't really grow up with church or Bible, and so that's not that big of an impact. But what you learned about sex from church makes a big impact. For some people, it's like, are you kidding me? Church and sex? Never. Those two things don't mix. Never anyone breathed a word about sex in church. Well, that's in a message. Even if they didn't talk about it, there's a message there. So what you learned and what expectations you may have had from reading the Bible, if your parents talk with you about it, makes an impact, certainly. That can be very, very good, and give you some very good, wise instruction on how to approach sex, but it's going to make an impact. And then the final thing that I touch on here is just whatever you've heard from experts. We live in a culture of experts these days. Here, I'm an expert coming in to tell you all I got the degree and the experience, and I've got a tie and a microphone, so I must know what I'm talking about. There's a camera rolling. I must know all this stuff. So many experts. I was at Barnes & Noble just yesterday, and on the big clearance table, there was a book by Dr. Laura on the care and feeding of marriage, and I thought, she's this big expert, everybody loves her. I haven't actually read any of her stuff, so I guess it's time I got the book and read it, so at least I'll know what she's actually saying, because a lot of people are listening. We live in a culture of experts, and so whatever the experts have said about sex and sexuality and marriage, it's going to impact your expectations. All right. Let's shift gears just a little bit into some biblical insights. Now, I'm not going to go through and read all of these. I know you've just finished a presentation talking about biblical perspectives on marriage. But specifically, I just want to look at a few things and just talk to you about them on what the Bible does have to say about sex, its role in marriage, and why it's so important. Because I think this is huge. It's so important for our lives as husband and wife. The first couple of verses just give the biblical background on sex and marriage and where it all came from. And of course, the classic verse is Genesis, right in the very beginning, Genesis chapter 2:24. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And it goes on in 1 Corinthians talking about sex. And when you really look at the biblical teaching and perspective on sex, it is clear that sexual union, our bodies coming together in this unbelievably intimate way, was designed to not only make a deep physical connection, but to connect our hearts and our lives and our spirits together in a way that we're not going to experience in any other relationship in our life. It's just this incredible bonding experience But it's really clear if you read through this 1 Corinthians 7 chapter, which is kind of the marriage chapter of the Bible, that the expectation is in your marriage, if you really want it to be a good, solid relationship, you need to have sex on a regular basis and plenty of it. Now, there's not any set timing or formula to that. Sometimes couples that are engaged, when we're meeting just one-on-one in session, or two-on-one, I guess, I'm talking with the couple and ask if they have any questions, and sometimes one of them will sheepishly say, well, is there kind of a certain frequency that's really we should be having sex? I don't know. What do you think? And I always do my best to avoid giving a direct answer to that because there's not a set number on it. But really, if you want to have a strong marriage bond, make it a priority. Now, my guess is that for everybody here in the audience, everybody that's watching on the web, I don't have to tell you right now that you need to have plenty of sex. That's probably going to happen pretty naturally. But give you 5, 7, 10 years, you got a kid or 2 or 3 along the way, life's gotten real busy, it can get real easy to be like, I'm in here watching my cable tonight and just, there's sports on rerun, or I'm worn out and the kids have just taken everything from me all day. Yeah, I'll catch you on the flip side. Maybe next month we might think about doing a little something fun. And so, you may not need to hear it now, but I just want to plant that seed with you that it really is critical that throughout the different changing times and seasons of life, that sex remains a priority, that you have it on a regular basis to connect you, to celebrate, to enjoy each other. And quite frankly, sometimes the expectation that we're going to get together, we're going to be having sex here tonight or sometime soon, is one of those things that can help push you to deal with stuff that maybe you've been putting off and avoiding. There's this little nagging conflict, there's this disagreement, you've been avoiding this thing, and the thought of coming together and being that intimate with each other, I guess we better deal with this stuff first. And it really could be a good motivator to deal with your relationship issues. So I hope it will be for you. Another verse, this was kind of a joke, fun passage in some ways, I guess, in my experience with other Christian couples during the engaged time. We love to quote this verse. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. And his teaching in this verse is, Paul teaching, is basically to say that if you're dating, if you're engaged, he's talking to engaged couples, and you just can't keep your hands off of each other, God's hope, God's direction would be, well, if that's the way it is, if you're ready and you're committed, then get married. Move up the date if you've got to. That really is better for your relationship. It's better in the long run than just to give in and just go at it and do whatever you got to do before you're married. There's lots of reasons for that, but I'll tell you very quickly, and I don't know where everyone is, and I'm certainly not going to ask for a show of hands on what your experiences are there. But in my experience, I believe with all of my heart that every instruction that God gives us through the Bible, through His written word, every instruction about anything that He gives us is always for our best interest. I know sometimes we can look at some of these things, if you're familiar at all with the Bible and you see these restrictions and you think, well, does He just want to see whether or not we'll follow it, just to see how much He can control us and just steal our fun, and why can't I do this? It's really great. But in my experience, I believe wholeheartedly that it's always what's best for us. And there's a lot of reasons for that, for this particular instruction, but there's a lot of research that continues to come out that really shows that the very best way to approach sexuality is to keep it within the confines of marriage and to wait until you're married. So I won't preach any further on that, but it really is the best. It really is. Okay. This was, I don't know if anyone's ever played this ridiculously silly game before, but this was a fun thing we used to do at the Christian college where I went. It was this fun thing. You get a fortune cookie in the cafeteria, and you'd read the fortune, and you'd add "in bed" at the end of it. Anyone ever play that little silly game? Okay, that's really goofy. And now next time you're at the Great Wall, you're going to be like, oh, that is kind of funny, and you're going to be doing this ridiculous game. So you'd read the fortune, you say "in bed." Okay, here's this cool idea I got for you. Read through Philippians chapter 2 sometime and add the phrase "in bed" here and there at appropriate places. And I'll read it for you. I'll share with you what that sounds like, and I'll make a point from it. Philippians chapter 2 is my very favorite passage in the Bible to give me a model for how married life should be. Now, the interesting thing is it doesn't even mention marriage. it's talking to Christians about how you're supposed to treat each other, how to relate to each other. But of all of our relationships, our marriage should be the best. It should be the primary one, the one we give our very best to. And so Paul writes, and I'm just going to, instead of reading it twice, I'll make the most of our time. I'll read it, and I'll put the little phrase in there to give you the idea. Hopefully the lightning won't come and strike me as I do this. It'll be recorded for posterity if it happens. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose in bed. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit in bed, but in humility consider others, and let me qualify, your spouse, let's not make this plural, consider your spouse better than yourself in bed. Each of you should look not only to your own interest, but also to the interest of your spouse in bed. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. And I share that because I'm going to tell you, folks, you can study all the positions and you can get your Kama Sutra book and your manual and your wild, crazy sex guides and all this stuff. But if you really want to have amazing, erotic, passionate sex in your marriage, and I hope all of you do, serve each other. Make it a top priority to serve each other. And I think that's so important as a general theme in your relationship, that you make it a priority, as Garrett mentioned a little while ago, sacrificially look for opportunities to serve each other throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout life, that you make it a priority to be a servant to your spouse, even at times when you don't feel like it, but specifically that you serve each other in the bedroom, figuratively, in your sexual relationship. And that, I don't know how much experience everyone has here, but the truth is that can be a place of tremendous selfishness. I mean, even in your marriage, the person that you're committed to, you can get to a point in your sexual relationship where it really just becomes, this is all about me. I just want to get my needs met, and I want to get gratified, and you're just here for me, so I can just get off, literally. Well, okay, hopefully that's going to happen and happen really well, but sex is at its best when we really are serving and making it a priority to serve each other. When I'm learning, I make it a commitment to learn, what does my wife really enjoy? What really turns her on? What's really pleasurable for her? What does she really enjoy? And then I learn how to do that as best as I can. And I want to do that for her. And for me, it's really amazing when I grow in this of doing things for her that really delight her sexually, and that becomes a delight for me, and it's really exciting and great when I can tell that she's really loving what's happening, and that in itself is rewarding for me. And I hope you will all experience that and make that a commitment and a priority to be that kind of servant in the bedroom to your mate. Okay, a final biblical Christian perspective on marriage, on the sexual aspect of marriage, that I just think is so important, and I see this just crumbling apart right now in our culture. And there's a lot of verses we could look at. I've got 3 passages listed. I won't read through them, but there's a consistent message through the Bible that you've got to stay sexually pure and committed to your spouse. End of story. Obviously we know that means don't go having sex with other people. Although lots of people, somehow along the way, things are moving separate in their marriage, they're having problems, they're not being fulfilled by one another, and they take one step at a time, and they are having sex with other people. And they come to my office, and they're broken, and they're angry, and they're ashamed, and we've got lots of hard work to do. It can be overcome, but it's incredibly painful. But short of that, it can be so easy to follow our culture, because it just lays it out there for us, to do all kinds of other things that may not quite cross that line, but can be really just as damaging to the sexual purity and container of our marriage. Pornography is kind of an obvious one, but it amazes me how many Christian men just kind of justify it by saying, what's the big deal? I mean, everybody looks at porn, what's the deal? What are you getting all uptight about? It's fun, she doesn't even mind. It's just so damaging. It's damaging to the self-esteem of your wives. It gets her to doubting herself. I can't tell you how many women I've talked to that are just brokenhearted. Their husband's caught up in pornography and they're saying, I don't know what it is about me that I'm not good enough, you know. A beautiful woman, you know, I don't know what I need to do. It's not about you, it's about him and what's going on in his heart. So guys, ladies too, but usually not as big of an issue, you know, I'm just going to tell you now, porn is going to cause major problems in your marriage if you go there. But there's other things that are getting more and more common that are sexual boundary crossings because of our communication technology. I can't tell you how many spouses now, how many marriages are coming in where there's infidelity that's happening that may not have even gotten all the way to the point of sexual contact between, you know, someone else and a spouse. But I mean, there's so much sexual, intimate sharing that's going on through emails, through phones, cell phones, through texting each other. I've got spouses now coming in going, you know, I need to have a private session with you. There's something I got to talk about. And they come in with this printout and they go, look at this evidence of emails and text message records that I've got off my spouse's cell phone and accounts and stuff. And I can't even believe this. I just want to scream. You know, look at what's going on. And those kind of things happen, I believe, when we get into a situation where we want to have just a little bit more conversation with this person, or just a little bit more meeting, a little bit more closeness with this person, and we're not doing anything sexual, we're not doing anything wrong, but there's this part of us that says, but my spouse probably wouldn't like it very much, so I just won't say anything. I'm not doing anything wrong, but she wouldn't understand, or he'd just give me a hard time about it. So we start to just give ourselves permission to do some things in secrecy and have this relationship that either our spouse doesn't know about or it becomes much more than they know about. And that climate of secrecy can just open up the door to going into places that we may never have imagined we would go in violating that sexual trust. So enough on that, but I hope you will heed the warning and guard your heart. Okay, we're going to shift gears dramatically here. All right, this is a part where hopefully you have a little fun, get a little interaction from you. We are going to have a little bit of time for trivia. So, if you've looked ahead, some of you may have been trying to figure out the answer to this question. Who would be bold enough to take a guess at what is the largest sex organ? Okay, it could be male or female. I'm including anybody, anything goes. What's the largest sex organ? What do you think? Anybody bold enough to take a shot at it? They're not going to record this on the camera. The world is not going to hear you say it. No takers. How about the skin? Largest sex organ. The skin is actually the largest organ in your body. We don't think of it that way a lot of times. We don't even think of it as an organ sometimes. It's just kind of there. But it's the largest organ in your body. It covers everything. And I mean, you talk about a sexual part of your body, let's talk about your skin. And I share that just to make the point that it can be easy sometimes you get into sex to just kind of go right for the end zone and just take care of business and whoo, well, that was great, you know, and you just kind of get things over with. But there's all kinds of places where you can enjoy all along the journey, all over your body, and it can be amazing. You know, there are times where, you know, my wife and I could be in a place where we're not about to start doing obviously sexual things, you know, like maybe even sitting in a place like you guys find yourself today. There you are. We're not in church exactly, but we're in this very church kind of a place. And, you know, just to reach over and hold, not just hold a hand, but there might be a certain thing that one of us might do, you know, just holding hands that just kind of gives us a little hint of, you know, it's on my mind. And it's just like, you know, and you just kind of sit there and, wow, this is going to be fun this afternoon. We get the kid to sleep, you know, you need nap time today, son, I promise. And lock the door and, you know. So our skin is very sexual, and I, you know, encourage you to explore the whole package and enjoy that. It's a huge part of our sexual expression, just our whole body contact. Let's see. Okay, how about this one? So that's the largest sex organ. Hopefully the juices are flowing here a little bit. You're kind of tracking along with me. What do you think is the most powerful sex organ? This could get really fun, right? What's the most powerful sex organ in the body, do you think? Anyone want to take a shot at that one? Promise not to mock you if you say it and I don't agree with your answer. How about the brain? I'm going to vote for the brain, okay? I mean, brain is basically the driver of our whole self. I mean, that's our CPU, if you will, central processing unit for who we are. And you talk about power. And I mentioned that one because it's so important to remember that what happens between us sexually is going to be an expression of what's going on with us internally, the kind of thoughts and experiences that I've had today, this week, this month, this year, and what's going on in the space between us. And so what we're thinking makes a massive impact on what happens with us sexually. And so it's important not to underestimate that. Power your brain in this whole process. Very important. We'll take a look momentarily at some significant differences between the male and female brain and how that can make an impact. And I'll give you a handout on that you can take home that didn't get in your packet. And I would say, even though no one ventured any guesses, I would give some honorable mentions on the important sex organs to your eyes, your mouth, and your ears. Now, you could get real creative and think about some wild and fun things to do there, and hopefully you'll enjoy those. But what I'm thinking specifically about, the reason I mention your eyes, your mouth, and your ears is because, how we see, what we see makes a huge impact, especially for men. And there is that's one of those areas where there really is a tremendous difference most of the time between men and women in terms of what drives us, what arouses us sexually. That men are just hardwired for visual sexual arousal. What we see just makes an impact on what happens with us, sometimes whether we want it to or not, and we start walking around funny and all that stuff, but we won't go into all that. Can't believe I just said that. It's going to be on the web, but hey, there it is. So visual, our eyes. Our mouth and our ears, how we communicate with one another. There's going to be a section later on that Dr. D. Adams will present that is going to talk very in-depth about our communication. But obviously, how we communicate with one another makes a huge impact on how we're going to feel toward one another sexually. How comfortable, how excited, how safe, all of those things. So, all very important. Okay, let's have hopefully a little bit of fun here. Okay, I don't know how well everybody's going to be able to see this. This is a difference in the male and female brain. Can y'all see that at all over there? I'll try to help you out with it. You might have seen this before. So the male and female brain, here we go. Now, the female brain, you'll notice, of course, the need for commitment hemisphere, rather important for the ladies. The ice cream receptor and the chocolate center are very closely located. Oftentimes there's kind of an overlap between those two sections. Now, you might overlook, it is important to see, there is a sense of direction nuclei. So for the ladies, it's not big, but occasionally there's a sense of direction that kicks in. The argue and debate lobe, shopping, important there, lots of things. Now, obviously, this is meant to be funny. It's this kind of ridiculous, extreme thing. But you'll notice over here is the sex particle right there. It's not void, it's just, not very big. That's kind of the cultural perception, cultural depiction of the ladies. The male brain, in contrast, sex, it's everywhere. It's, it's kind of like the Texas bigger than life thing going on there. I kind of like the gastrointestinal pride, is a really important thing there. I'm all about that. Lame excuses gland, important. Math stuff. The Michelob, I just get a kick out of that. That was kind of a witty throw in there. The Michelob. The listening particle, occasionally we actually get, what they're saying to us. The personal hygiene cell. But interestingly enough, then you have the commitment molecule over here. It's not that we're not willing to commit. We just commit just to that little bit. Now, what I want to point out in this is that obviously what's meant to be this funny wisecracking on men and women, yeah, we can see it on. I think it makes a very important point in this, in our cultural perception and in a real truth, because this is only funny to us to the degree that we can really kind of relate to it, and that it really is what makes it funny, even though it's extreme. And you'll notice when you look at the female and the male brain, what are the big areas? Each of them has one really big area. What do you see? A little bit louder. It's okay. Say, what is it? Okay, commitment for the female, need for commitment, and sex is a big one for the male. Now, you'll also notice that they have those two things represented as, a particle and a molecule on the other gender, right? The sex particle on the female brain and the commitment molecule on the male brain. Okay. Now, I think this points out a tremendous truth in marriage and relationships between men and women, because sex and commitment are two incredibly important parts of our marriage. And the deal is, there may be some inherent differences between men and women and what comes naturally and what we're interested in and what seems to be our top priority. But, I guess for the guys, if we're really going to have the best sex and plenty of it, it's going to happen in the context of real commitment. And that's just, it's not only important to our wives, it's important to us as well, but that's where the best sex is going to happen, is when commitment is there. When you know that you can trust this person, that they're not going to cheat on you, obviously, but even commitment in the sense that as we're having sex and if something just doesn't quite go right or things aren't working out, that's okay. It's really okay. I'm not going to be just mocked for it or left for it or anything like that. Whatever happens with us sexually is okay, we're safe. There's commitment going on. But the flip side of that is also true, that in marriage, if we're going to really stick with it and have that lifetime commitment, we need to be having that regular sex. It's an important part of it, to expect. And again, there's some gender bias in this, but for wives to expect husbands to stay committed, but just not really interested in sex anymore, that's not quite a fair equation. Sex and commitment, they go hand in hand. Both of them are extremely important, and both of them complement and make the other that much better in marriage. So even though it's meant to be funny there, I think there's an important lesson in it. Okay, let's see. Moving right along. Here we go. A few specific points I want to make about things you may not necessarily think about sex in your marriage. There's a Christian author named Kevin Leman who wrote one of my very favorite books on sexuality. It's called Sheet Music. I highly recommend it. It's in your recommended resource list. I've got a whole page full of resources I recommend there. But one of his first books that he wrote was a book called Sex Begins in the Kitchen. And he wasn't talking about finding exotic, wild places to have sex around the house. His point was to really have the best whenever you do get together to have sex. That's got to flow out of a relationship where all day you've been considerate and loving and kind and serving to one another, at least for the most part. None of us are perfect here, but you relating to each other in ways that are good and considerate. And so, great marriages are usually going to result in great sex, not the other way around. Just because you find a relationship where you have hot, wild sex doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a really good marriage basis for that. But if you want great sex tonight, be considerate of your spouse today. Be considerate and serving today. And truly great sex, I believe, is built on great intimacy. Now, a lot of times people just, whenever you use the word intimacy, they'll just equate that with sex. We're going to be intimate and we're going to have sex. That's kind of what we think when we say that. But to me, intimacy is about being vulnerable. There is no way to experience the best of intimacy, certainly sexually speaking, without making ourselves vulnerable. And that's scary. I mean, what potentially can happen when you make yourself vulnerable, just in general terms? If you're really vulnerable, then what does that imply? What could happen? You can get embarrassed when you're vulnerable? Absolutely. What else? You could get hurt? You bet. Anything else come to mind? If you're really vulnerable in some situation, you could get left behind, you get betrayed. And I really think kind of the common tie there really is that you set yourself up to be hurt in one way or another, whether it's through embarrassment or anything else. Being vulnerable means you could really get hurt. And I mean, I got to tell you what, when you make yourself totally vulnerable, your body and soul and everything to this other person, you can really get hurt in the process. My wife and I, each of us have had times in our marriage and our sexual expression with one another where something just didn't go quite right and there was a look or something got said or just body parts just things didn't happen right, and all of a sudden it can just be this, okay, this total withdrawal and total embarrassment or hurt or whatever, and then there becomes a relational problem that we've got to deal with. We've got to talk through and lovingly do our best to heal for one another. It is extremely vulnerable to make yourself open and available sexually. But the good news is, if you're willing to do that, that can be the pathway to incredible fulfillment. Because, if you just do the easy stuff without really sharing from the heart, without really exposing yourself, okay, it might be kind of fun, but it won't be as fulfilling as what you can get if you make yourself truly vulnerable with each other, because then you can find real intimacy and you can have the best of sexual expression. Okay. I made this statement. I hope this will make sense to folks. This is one of those that's like I could do a whole seminar on this, but I'll just mention it and we'll move on. But, there's this saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I'll kind of change that a little bit. Sexy may be in the eye of the beholder, but it's also in the confidence of the presenter. And I really believe that if I get to a point where I feel comfortable in my own skin, physically comfortable with my own body, but also just comfortable with who I am, that I'm not just second-guessing myself, and I'm not sure if she'll like this, if he's going to like that. But when I can really feel comfortable and confident in who I am, that's a pretty sexy deal in marriage. That's sexy to your partner, to your spouse, when you feel comfortable and you can just present yourself, and I just know who I am, and this is what I want, and this is what I have to offer. That's good stuff. And sometimes one of the best things you can do to improve your sex life and your marriage in general is to work on yourself and work on getting to a point where you're really okay with yourself, which may mean learning to accept who you are and work through some issues and struggles that you may have. Other times it may mean changing some things about yourself that you don't feel okay about because maybe they're not really okay, and you do need to make some changes, But the more you can get to where you really enjoy who you are, your spouse is going to enjoy you, and sexually you really enjoy each other and become incredibly sexy to each other. Very important stuff, I think. Really great stuff, And it's interesting to me. I'm sure they didn't think real deeply about this song, and they wanted to understand all the implications of it when they wrote it. It just sounded really great, and everybody loved it when they performed it. But to me, there's such a huge difference between the phrase, I want you to want me, and I need you to need me. Now, both of that may kind of sound the same thing to you. In fact, I need you to need me may sound even more intense. Oh, yeah, I want to be needed. That's really great stuff. But I got to tell you, in my experience, I need you in a relationship, if it lasts for very long, ends up becoming, I'm really needy. And that never is fun, right? I need you may come across, just you hear that phrase, I really need you. And that may sound really romantic and deep and sound like a good thing. But I doubt if I'm really needy sounds good to any of you, right? I'm needy just doesn't come across very well. But the truth is, if in our relationship, whether sexually or otherwise, if in order for me to really feel okay with who I am and feel complete, if I need you and you have to be a certain way and you have to do things the way I want them, if I need that from you in order to be okay, I won't say it the way I would if the camera wasn't rolling, but I'm in big trouble, okay? Because you may not do things the way that I really want you to. And so what do I do now? If I need you to need me or to do things a certain way, man, I'm in trouble now. But I got to say, I want you to want me. To me, that's really, really honest and vulnerable. I love that. I want you to want, I really do. It'd be really great if you wanted me. I hope you do. I want you to, but I'm just going to take the risk and see what happens. Just that point, I think, is so important. If I need you to do things in a certain way, I've got to learn to be okay with life if it doesn't go just the way I want. And one of the beauties of marriage, I think, and Garrett, I thought, made some really great points about this, is that while even though I'm in real trouble if I need you to be a certain way, hopefully we're committed in marriage that on the other side of that I want to do things in a certain way that are great for you, and I'm doing my best. One of my favorite, just most beautiful pictures of this, if you've never read the story The Gift of the Magi, this classic short story, it's like 100, 150 years old maybe, I think. A little bit of language gets a little bit archaic, but it's a beautiful story about this couple, these two people who, they just have absolutely nothing. I mean, they just don't have any kind of money, and it's coming Christmas time, and each of them knows exactly what the other one would really, really love to get. And well, I won't spoil the story, but it's a beautiful story about how each of them just makes this kind of ultimate sacrifice to be a blessing to the other, and then the real irony that happens when they open their presents, and the beauty of it is, who cares about the presents? You're willing to give everything to me without any expectation of anything in return, and I'm willing to do the same for you. And wow, we've got something that most people in the world never even dream of. Read the story if you've never read it. It's wonderful. Okay, a few final things as we start moving down the home stretch. This is one, I just really think this is an important factor. It's one of those, it's interesting, if you look just kind of statistically at what happens, not with everyone, but often with weight, just as an easy measure of this, before marriage and after marriage, you know, most people don't end up on this like lightweight track, you know, after they get married. You know, you kind of see what happens, often, not with everyone, but oftentimes. And I really think there's a lot of reasons for that. I don't want to oversimplify it, but I really think one of the reasons is, you know, you're putting on your best face, you're putting on your best presentation when you're trying to attract whoever's going to be that wonderful person you're going to spend your life with, and you just really present yourself well. And there's just something that makes it easy once you got the other person and you both said I do, and you get on with life, married life, to just kind of let yourself go, for lack of a better phrase. And I just want to really put in a plug now to encourage folks to remember that in terms of physical attraction, which is certainly not the most important thing in your marriage relationship, but it does matter. It's important that you know, your fiance or girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever status you're at this point, that person became attracted to you and was drawn to you and fell in love with you with how you look right now. Now, we can't just bottle the age and appearance we have now and keep it forever, but you know, for some people, you see them 3 years after they're married and you see their wedding pictures and go, is that even the same person? So I just want to encourage you, keep your bodies in good shape, you know, for yourself, for your own well-being, so you feel good, life is better, but also as a gift and as a loving expression to your spouse, you know. Might as well. Certainly improves things in the bedroom, and you'll feel better as a result. Okay, we already talked about that, past sexual trauma. Okay, just a few practical tips that I'll share from my own experience. And man, I really wrestled with this one since the cameras are rolling, but why not? We'll just roll the dice and see what happens. Now, some of these may be things that some of you may be plenty experienced already. You don't really need any tips, but some of you, you know, I can remember I was engaged. It was coming up right at the end of my last year of school, college. And a good friend of mine who's also engaged, he got married 2 weeks after I did, I think. Both of us in our relationships, you know, we were waiting, we were holding out, weren't having sex until we were married, and we got together with a friend of ours that had been married for a couple of years, and we're talking and just shooting the bull and all this stuff, and somehow it shifted serious, and he said, well, one of us, I think, asked him something about sex, and I really appreciated that he really saw the power of this moment. I really respect him. He's a Christian brother I really respected. And he just said, you know, guys, if you'd like to ask him some questions, I'd be glad to share whatever my experience is. Now, this guy actually, now he's a marriage and family therapist as well. So, but we did. We kind of asked him some questions, and he's telling us some things. And I really appreciated just that, just open, just really practical, like, here's the deal. Here's what happens. So here's just a few practical tips from me to you. I would really encourage you, if at all possible, if this is in any way reasonable, that on your honeymoon, after the wedding ceremony, especially if you haven't had sex yet, give yourself a little bit of time to just kind of relax, catch your breath, before you just rip off your clothes and go for it, you know. I think for a lot of people, I mean, it's just, you can't wait for there to be no one else in the room, so you can just, you know, do what you got to do. You may not be feeling that way, I don't know. But, you know, take some time, relax, enjoy, laugh about what your goofy cousin did, or, you know, I can't believe my stepdad actually wore that, or whatever, you know, and laugh, enjoy, and then just, you know, enjoy the whole package. But take your time, you know, pace yourself. Now, this is one, you know, my buddies, they gave this to me as like this joke gift thing, and it's funny how practical it turned out being. In this conversation I was mentioning with this guy who had been married for a couple of years, he mentioned this to us, And we kind of laughed knowingly, like, well, of course I knew that, and I really didn't realize it, but I'm pretending that I did because, of course, I don't want to look stupid. He's like, guys, I got to tell you, sex is really messy, and it gets a little messy, So he said, I recommend having like a towel or something that you don't mind using for that purpose. And so, yeah, oh yeah, of course, I hadn't really thought about that. I don't know how I envisioned it, but you just, you kind of see the things depicted, and it just seems like, you just kind of, you do your thing and just kind of roll over, and it's all cool, and, I don't know, it gets a little messy. So my buddies, they took this towel, and they put a verse of scripture on there that was really hilarious, and I won't quote it here, but just this sexual reference, it was really funny. And then they wrote kind of a joke blessing to us on there in permanent ink, and this was our designated sex towel. I'm not going to tell you, man, that thing has come in handy, I wouldn't even dream of using it for anything else at this point. I'll just let you use your imagination there. But we've been married for 12 years, but it really comes in handy. So, that could be fun. And you can even have fun with that. You could have like the bright, red one that you just pull out occasionally and spread across the bed just to go, I guess what's going to happen tonight, or the one with the glow-in-the-dark, word that just lets them know what's going to happen. So, be playful, have fun with that stuff. Let's see, the other thing, just some practical things that I really recommend, along with that whole sex towel thing that our buddy recommended, we have found. Now, you got to go with the unscented hypoallergenic kind I highly recommend, because trouble could come if you get the real scented perfume kinds. But, I got to tell you, the baby wipes make for real quick, easy cleanup. If you've never thought about it before, I'm telling you, it's the way to go. We'll leave it at that. So we keep a tub of them by the bed. It's really great. And there's all kinds. It's amazing now how many kind of products they're coming out with. Just to make the whole lubrication thing just real easy and not problematic. And now they got things that are like spicy and warm and all kinds of stuff happening. So, go have some fun at the drugstore or the grocery store and look at the aisle. There's just all kind of fun choices there. So, not that you need them, but, it could be fun. So, there you go. So, speaking of vulnerable, I just said that for everyone to hear. Okay. We got just a couple of minutes here. Anybody have any questions? Again, I'll remind you, you're not going to be filmed on this part. We'll just have my responses, so feel free to ask anything if you really want to. Any questions at all about anything? Not particularly. None that I want to share right here with the whole group to hear, right? Okay. Well, let's see. I'll close with this. Just my hope for you in your marriage, in the sexual aspect and expression of your marriage, that you will really continue to work on yourself. It's so often in marriage, it's easy to want to really work on our spouse, try to improve them as much as we can, while we're serving ourselves as much as possible. And I want to encourage you now. You don't have to wait till you're married. Start right now, and over the course of your marriage, to flip that around to where you are committed to really working on yourself and doing your best to serve your spouse. And I'm going to tell you what, if you'll do that in your sexual life and throughout your marriage will be strong, be a blessing to you, to whatever children come your way, and to other people who have the opportunity to connect with you. So work on yourself and serve your spouse, not the other way around. In the bedroom and wherever you go, and your marriage will be a blessing, and I'll leave you with that. God bless you, folks. It's been good to be here today.